So maybe you're an activist, and you're interested in watching this because the work that you do involves people, and you want to make it so that the fruits of your activism are even more successful. Or maybe you're a communications student, and you're wondering, what is it about my chosen fields of study that is influenced by and influences the social world around me? And how can this thing that I've chosen to take up as a study make the good come to pass in the world? Maybe you're a communication teacher, and you're wondering, how is it that I can infuse my curriculum, or a broad set of curricula, with more socially just, relevant concepts or theories? And how can I make the process of educating someone in communication more enabled to do good in the world? Or maybe you're simply curious, and when you hear the words social justice communication all uttered next to each other, you think, what the heck is that? I want to know a little bit more. So this is a video series taking up questions about social justice communication and what that all means anyway. So I will ask, what is social justice communication? Let's break it down into its component parts. I want to start with justice. Oftentimes when we think of justice, we think of fairness, or the right thing in a particular situation coming to pass. Now, there are all kinds of contexts that justice operates in. There's criminal justice, where we ask questions about how it is that we should punish people who have done injustice to in particularized situations. There are questions of restorative justice. How is it that I can take a broken situation and create fairness and make the good things come to pass in a way that are good for all people? So it's important to ask, even if I understood what justice is, what does adding social to the word justice get us? What is social justice? Now, like justice, social justice means a lot of things too. People use the term social justice to talk about equity, to talk about liberty, to talk about life enhancement or human flourishing. They use it to raise questions of fairness or access or even human rights. And that's all pretty broad. So one of the things that I often do when I'm trying to imagine what social justice is actually flip the words around. And so instead of saying, what is social justice, I might say, what does a just society look like? And I find that that's a little easier to imagine. So a just society is a society wherein the right things come to pass for all peoples. There are two other notions that are important to raise when discussing what is social justice. One of those is that social justice almost always relies on paying attention to structure. And so this is to say that someone who pursues social justice asks cultural or historical or economic questions about why things are the way they are. So yeah, it's really nice to give money to somebody who needs money, or to feed someone who needs food. But in order to do the work of social justice, you also have to say, why is it that we live in a world where I needed to give that money or that food in the first place? It's not enough to be a good person to do justice. You need to also say, why are we in the situation that we're in, and how is it that we could behave not only in the immediate realm, but in long-term ways, such that these things never even came to pass. The second sensibility with regard to social justice that is important to raise is that it's not simply a better world that the advocate of social justice is seeking. Social justice has a particular attention to the most impoverished, the most marginalized, and the most oppressed. The sensibility here is it requires paying attention to the troubles and turmoils of those for whom the world sucks the most. Because it turns out there are a lot of versions of a better world. The world could get a little bit better for everyone. The world could get even better for the people for whom it's already pretty good. But social justice says, no, I will actually privilege in my thought, in my heart, in my body, work that pays the closest attention and has its heart most broken for people who are the most impoverished. Okay, so that's a rough sketch of what social justice is. What then is communication? So communication can be thought of a lot of different ways also. One of the ways to think about it is across various orders of magnitude. So communication can be very small. For instance, the interaction of one person and another person, conversation between two people. We call this interpersonal communication. You can scale that up a little bit and look at the communication that exists within small groups and the dynamics of their conversations and relationships. Scale it up a little bit more and you get to organizations. How is it that people accomplish things to... how is it that people work together to accomplish things together? And then you can scale that up even more and ask really pretty broad questions like, how is it that culture influences us and gets influenced by our communication? How is it that our media trickles down between all of those things but also constructs our culture? And how is it that acts of public rhetoric and public discourse, how do those decisions get made? What are the impacts of that discourse? So one way of thinking about communication is kind of macro, meso, micro level human interactions. Within those orders of magnitude, though, there are a diversity of ways of thinking about communication still. You can think about communication from the perspective of messages. How is it that we encode, send, and decode messages? You can think about communication from the perspective of meaning. How is it that we negotiate and come to share meaning? How do we assent and contest what different things mean to us? We can think about communication from the perspective of bodies, our bodies together and how they move and interact and face each other or don't face each other. Communication relates to space and how it gets used, and the media through which these messages and bodies and meanings and space get rendered and understood. One of my favorite definitions of communication is really pretty simple, and that is, what does it mean to be human together? Okay, so we've talked a little bit about justice, the social part of social justice, and what communication is. So how do all these things assemble? How does this fit together? So one of the core aspects of the study of communication is recognizing that communication makes society. That the world that we live in, at least the social world, is very much assembled by ongoing, embodied, enacted acts of communication. So part of taking a communicative approach to questions of social justice is that it helps us understand how we got to the place that we're in now anyway. And it forces us to pay close attention to how inequity gets made in little ways across all of these different orders of magnitude, such that when we look at the society that we currently live in, we can trace back these choices about how we chose to depend or not depend on each other, or to be with or not be with each other, and where we drew lines of inclusion and exclusion, and it allows us to see how we got to the screwed up situation that we're currently in today. But thankfully, there's a more optimistic side of that, which is that communication helps pave the path forward, because if we start to understand how it is that we made how we are today, and we can start to imagine how we want to be tomorrow, then we can start laying out the specific, actionable, embodiable, communicative acts that create the society that we do want to live in. Social justice, taken from a communication perspective, also raises attention to the social part of social justice. So here's what I mean. You could ask questions of social justice from a lot of different perspectives. Economic ones, or historical ones, anthropological ones. But when you take a communication approach, it forces us to see some of the human experiences that overlay some of the material or structural ones. Now, this is not to say that the structures of society, economic or material, are unimportant. They really matter, because material inequity is often what causes some of the most profound harms of injustice. But it also helps us look at the interactions that exist around those things, and maybe how those interactions lead to those material conditions, and how those material conditions further complicate those interactions. Taking a communicative approach, while it allows us to see material conditions, it allows us to also ask, what does it mean to be in a particular material condition? Because as you start looking across different societies, you start to realize that what it means to have or not have something doesn't have one objective meaning. And what it means to be poor has actually got a diverse set of meanings across different times and places. And communication helps us see that. So yes, not only does communication help us think about how we can organize effective responses, it also makes us ask, what is it like to be the recipient of one of those social justice responses? What does it feel like to be the target of advocacy? What does it feel like when someone tries to improve my life? Or what does it mean to engage in the conversation with the person whose life I'm trying to improve? Ultimately, a communicative approach to social justice allows us to do all the work of social justice, but with a specific emphasis on questions like human dignity. What does it mean to have dignity or not? How does that communicate it or not? What does it mean to be delegitimized or have a need denigrated? And what does re-legitimization look like? And if being human together is what communication is, then dehumanization is a communicative enterprise. And so then rehumanization becomes a communicative enterprise also. And it ultimately allows us to ask questions like, what does it mean to create a world where we become more human together? So this is the first in a series of videos that raise this question. What is social justice? What is communication? And how does the communicative world create broad structures of equity and inequity? And how do those structures of equity and inequity influence our communicative world? That is the questions that I hope to raise here. If there are things that you'd like to ask, feel free to put them in the comments below. I will also put resources with further readings, basically citing my sources on the various concepts that I raised in this video, and I look forward to the conversation that we will have.